barakatuhu. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And to our guests, ahlan wa sallam. Welcome. My name is Kareem Abdul Salam. I'll be your host tonight for the Candidates Forum for the Congressional District of District 4 in Maryland. Tonight we have Donna Edwards. We also have Glenn Ivey and Jazz Lewis. We will give a brief bio and we'll be back in a minute and we will start promptly. Thank you very much, and we'll talk in 1 minute. So as we're waiting for the guests to appear, we have two of the three that are standing by, but let me just give you an overview of the format. We have Donna Edwards, who previously held this seat from 2008 to 2017, becoming the first African American woman to represent Maryland in the United States Congress. She also sponsored an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would repeal 2010 Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. Next, we have Glenn Ivey, who has served on Capitol Hill as chief counsel to the Senate Majority Leader, as also counsel to Senator Paul Sarbanes during the Whitewater investigations, was majority counsel to the Senate Banking Committee, and on the staff of Representative John Conyers from Michigan. He also worked for attorney Eric Holder as an assistant U.S. attorney and as chair of the Maryland Public Service Commission. He also served as the state's attorney here in Prince George's County for over 9 years. And finally, we will have Jazz Lewis, who is a current delegate in the Maryland's 24th District, currently serves on the House Appropriations Committee, and is the chair of the Maryland House Democratic Caucus. Welcome to all three panelists, and we will begin now. Good evening, Glenn Ivey.
Good evening.
How are you?
Very blessed. How are you?
I'm doing good. And I think we're awaiting Jazz Lewis. There he is, Jazz Lewis. How are you?
I'm great.
Good, good. Were we able to get the Donna Edwards? Okay, she's not here. So we're going to begin, and I wanted to, we gave an introduction to both of you gentlemen. One, we thank you for joining and being prompt. As the Prince George's County Muslim Council, we want to at least discuss with you several concerns that we have. We met individually with you, Glenn, and also you, Jazz, and we wanted the community to see, all of us interact and really have a very heartfelt and informal discussion on issues that affect Marylanders and specifically that affects the Muslims here in Prince George's County in the 4th Maryland District. And so I want to take some questions, but the first question I have is that I know both of you have either worked for a congressman or worked for a senator on the Hill. And one of the things we want to at least get an understanding in your opening statement from each of you, what will you do should you be successful in securing the congressional seat in the Maryland 4th? And I will start an order of alphabetical order so we wouldn't be partial. So Glenn, you got the I, and you start first.
All right. Well, thank you. And I want to thank the council for the preliminary meeting and the chance to speak at that time, and certainly for the forum today. But not only that, for the work that you've done, not only now, but over the years. I met with the council previously, and you've done outstanding work, and I know you'll continue to do that. And I look forward to working with the council in the years going forward. I'm running for Congress because I want to have a chance to make a difference for people's lives here in Prince George's County and in the rest of the district, including Montgomery and Anne Arundel counties. These are challenging times. We've had, in some ways, it's almost unthinkable. I never would have imagined when I was a kid, after we got through the civil rights movement, after we got voting rights, after we got the right to live where we wanted to live and go to the schools where we wanted to go to, after the schools were just desegregated, I thought we were really moving forward. And then when President Obama got elected, for a moment there, I thought maybe the change has really happened here in the United States. But it's all turned around. The Tea Party came. Donald Trump got elected president. Incredibly, we still have 80% of Republicans who don't think that President Biden legitimately is the president of the United States. These are troubled times and a challenge for our democracy. And not only that, the challenge is there for individuals here in the community too. If you try and buy gas, you're trying to buy groceries, it's just too high. There are too many people who are struggling to make ends meet. They face eviction because of the rent increases. Housing prices have gone up and the like. These are really challenging times for them individually. And then really rugged 2 years with COVID. I know I lost friends. You've lost friends and family as well. It's been devastating for individual families, especially in the African community, but not solely there. And also it's ravaged the economy too. And so I think these are really tough times, and we need to come together and work together to try and find solutions to address these problems. I'm watching what's happening on Capitol Hill, and I think there's some good things that have happened. The infrastructure bill that passed was positive, for example. The CARES Act was a big step in the right direction. We've gotten bogged down, though, in the Senate, and I'm hoping that we can move forward with that. I think we have to break out individual pieces and move forward with things like, prescription drug prices and the like. I was telling one group the other day that I've got glaucoma or fighting glaucoma, and I got a bottle about the size of that part of my thumb costs $300 a month, and that's with insurance. So with those kinds of challenges, I know the president took on the challenges for insulin for diabetes the other day. It's another set of challenges too. We've got to come together and fight to move those things forward. Come the next Congress, if I get elected, unfortunately, it's looking like we might be in the minority in the House. And so my expectation would be that the Republicans spend as much time as they can doing investigations of the Biden administration, frequently illegitimately. And the fact that I worked on the Whitewater hearings when the tables were similar, they're trying to take down the Clinton administration because they couldn't beat him at the polls. So they went after him for everything you can think of. And you might remember the Benghazi things. They had like 45 hearings on Benghazi, although none of it really implicated Mrs. Clinton at all. But I think we're going to be looking at that. And I think the committee that deals with those issues and has to run interference for the Biden administration is going to be critical. And that's one of the committees I'd like to work on. There are others I'd like to do as well, and we'll have a chance to talk about those as the night goes on. But making sure they can't illegitimately take down the Biden administration. They tried it on January 6th. They keep trying it in other ways. We have to make sure we block those things, defend democracy, protect this presidency, and move forward to address the challenges that are facing our community across the board.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lewis, you have equal time.
First off, I want to thank you so much, Kareem, and the entire Prince George's County Muslim Council for having me. You all have been friends over my time, not just in office as a state delegate, but also working on the staff of Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. I can tell you, from over the last 2 years working in Congress, on the CARES Act, working on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and many other pieces of legislation, we have a lot of work that we need to do. This is a moment in our country where big change is possible, and we need government to be responsive. Both the federal government, but our local members of Congress too, showing up, picking up the phone, doing the needed work. I believe that every community, regardless of where you lay your head, deserve quality representation from their member. And when I say that, I mean bringing home the resources so that you have quality schools, you have safe communities. We need to do all we can to make sure our communities are safe. I think we are seeing a rising trend of gun violence all across of our communities. I've helped lead efforts in the state legislature to make sure that we are getting these guns off the streets. This current legislature, we have instituted a ban of ghost guns that we are seeing popping up. I think federally, we need to institute universal background checks. We need to close the Charleston loophole, ban ghost guns, and much more. We need to make sure that whether it's at the pump or if you're buying food, that we address rising inflation. I think a lot of that is tied to the supply backlog from COVID. Some of the work that I've done that got in the Build Back Better plan, and hopefully it gets passed, is part of a plan that actually Leader Hoyer had called Make It in America, which is bringing domestic a lot of our manufacturing, a lot of our supply, which is jobs for us here. I've been pushing to make sure that we do so equitably so that all Americans, particularly folks of color and those from diverse backgrounds, are helped. Something else we are noticing is a rise of attacks of folks on our institutions of faith, whether that is in our mosque or our temples and whatnot. And we need to protect them as well, So I'm running to be a member who will be responsive and show up and pick up the phone like I've done in Leader Hoyer's office, like I've done as a state delegate, focusing on issues of criminal justice reform, expanding access to health care as well. That's critically important. I had the great fortune of having an employer who allowed me to go and take care of my family when they were sick. My father had sepsis a few years ago, and I had to bathe him and shave him and take care of him. Getting real, not healthcare insurance, but getting real care is often very difficult for our communities. Not sponsor legislation to make sure that care is provided in our most needed communities. After I passed it in the state legislature, Congressman Brown introduced my bill on Capitol Hill to take it across the country. I would also introduce that bill back.
Okay. So I want to thank both of you for your comments. And what appears to me, and I'm sure to our listening audience, is that y'all have so much that are similar. You both are after the same agenda to have a better Maryland for Marylanders. And we, as the Prince George's County Council, want to understand what is the difference between each of you, because I'm hearing the same spiel in different formats, of course, but why should we choose one over the other? And what do you have, Mr. Lewis, that Mr. Ivey doesn't have? And Mr. Ivey, I'll give you a chance to find out, tell us what you have that Mr. Lewis doesn't have, and effectuating change for the people here in the 4th District. Mr. Lewis, I'll let you go first.
Well, I'll start with, I decided I was going to run for this seat before I knew of anyone running, so I don't view myself as running against Glenn or anyone else. I think they are great public servants, and I don't want to dishonor the work that they've done. But, like I said, when we were in the back room, for a few of us, I have a baby boy, and I'm running with a fierce urgency now to make sure the world that he inherits is healthy, is fair and equitable. I live in the city of Glenarden. This is the community that raised me where I'm from. Because of the national highway system being built in the 50s, it split Glenarden in half. Because of that, we have deteriorated air quality. It's an asthma problem. When people talk about the climate crisis, those are things that both my generation is going to experience and that of my children. I'm trying to make sure that we address all of these challenges now. I think something we both share is experience working on the Hill, getting things done. But I've been a member of a legislature. I know how to get things done. I've been in that role myself, not just working also for a member. I built relationships with Republicans, whether I was our governor or other state legislators, as I needed to do. And I'm focused on moving the ball forward for our community. The last thing I'll say is during the pandemic, I was personally leading. I helped open a nonprofit grocery store in a food desert at the height of the pandemic here, because that is what our community needed. And it's something I've been working on for years, So it's not just legislating, it is showing up in the community day in and day out. And you'll get that from me.
Sure. Mr. Ivey?
Well, I think my track record speaks for itself. I think, when I was state's attorney, we did really visionary things. The progressive prosecutor concept is sort of, routine almost now. But when we started that in 2002, We weren't the only place that did it. There were a handful of other jurisdictions that did. Kamala Harris in San Francisco, for example, I think came in shortly after that. Eric Holder was the guy I picked a lot of concepts up from. But we rolled that out pretty aggressively, and it had a big impact in a couple of ways. Number one, the intervention and prevention programs that we helped to start. And when I say help to start, I mean, we got the money and we gave it to the people who could do the program. So we weren't just kind of chipping in on the side. We helped to lead it. And that addressed things like drug court, intervention programs with respect to gangs, trying to keep them out. And if they were in, how to get them out before they really got into deep trouble. Domestic violence awareness was a big piece too. And we created a domestic violence court because we realized at the time that there were too many prosecutors, police officers, and judges who were not paying it the type of attention it deserved. You may recall there was a judge who dressed down a woman. Her name was Yvette Cade in public and was on the record. And then it came to light when the husband showed up at her job, poured gasoline over her head, and set her on fire. Now, that judge was removed because of the things that he said, but it sort of opened an eye up on what was going on in that community, with judges and cops and prosecutors. And the domestic violence court and the outreach programs we did, Project Safe Sunday was one of them, I think really helped to change the approach and engage national attention on the changes that we made there. When I came into office, gangs weren't viewed as a problem. In fact, when I first got elected and we started fighting the gangs, especially MS-13, I had people calling me and saying, Glenn, we don't have a gang problem in Prince George's County. But we know that we knew it was true then, and we know it's true now that we've got gangs. It's a challenge. It's in the schools, it's in the communities, and we led efforts to lock up those individuals who were committing violent murders and injuring people who were committing violence in the communities and wreaking havoc and creating fear in the Latino and African American communities. And then the other part that was big and kind of notable now, I think, is that we were successful in prosecuting police officers who used excessive force. In fact, I believe we got the first convictions during my tenure here in Prince George's County. And at the same time, violent crime dropped off the cliff. When I first got in office, we had 172 murders in the first year. By the time we left, we were under 100 and heading towards 80. And not only that, the changes that we made continued to the decreases in crime under the following state's attorneys, especially Angela Also Brooks, who came afterwards. At the same time as that, we were able to move forward in the community, reaching out to schools and helping to get intervention and prevention programs there. We started a second grader reading program. I got the funding from a private source. We put it into the schools to target second graders who were at-risk kids. Had sixth graders who were in the same schools to help them with the reading, because we were told by the teachers that the sixth grade kids that were helping the second graders, well, guess what? That helped them with their reading skills too. So that's just some of the programs that we rolled out when I was state's attorney. But the larger point is that, my job description and the budget I was given was just aimed at locking people up. It wasn't about finding ways to intervene and prevent people from getting locked up, reaching out to them before they got in trouble, helping them in schools. None of that was part of the budget, but we used the platform of the state's attorney's office to make a difference in ways that nobody had imagined here in this jurisdiction before. And now it's just the thing that people do all over the country. Okay. The other part too that I want to point out is that, we've been active on a lot of these efforts over the decades. I've been out of office 10 years, but guess what? When COVID hit, my wife, Jolene, my son, Julian, and I worked together to get 75,000 meals to people who were hungry out in Prince George's County, working with the faith community, getting the meals from other sources and the funding, bringing it all together. Vaccines was another piece of that. And finally, this is Jolene mainly, but, at the beginning of the crisis, nobody remembers this now, but nobody had these N95 masks. They just were not available. Jolene worked with a group of people that started sewing them, just ordering cloth and elastic and guess what happened to those masks that they sewed? They went to the hospital because the nurses up at Prince George's Hospital didn't have any masks to wear until they made them. So those are the types of things you can do without a budget, without a position, without, a special authorization, you can get those things done. And we've done those things. And I'll continue to do them, especially if I get a chance to get elected to Congress. And then finally, I mentioned this a moment ago, but there's going to be a war on Capitol Hill over the next 2 years. And
We're
part
gonna-
of this
if you can hold that, because that's a question that we want to ask.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Jazz, before I give you a minute to have time, because he went over a brief little bit, we're going to bring up a youth to ask a question to both of you, but I just want to let the audience know who they can come in and post their questions on Facebook and also, excuse me, on YouTube chat. So please do that now so we can ask those questions. Jazz, let me give you a minute to respond, because I know Glenn took an extra minute, but let me give you a minute.
I mean, the only thing I'm going to add is like, look, one of the clear differences here, and I think is great coming from a family of service. I don't come from a family in politics, so you get me, and I actually think Glenn brought up a really great point, which I forgot about. It's like people forgot, particularly early on, is that when people were looking for N95 masks, our young people needed them. I got over 1,000 N95 masks for our children at the women's shelter in Capitol Heights, with UCAP. I think this is about service. You have two people who's talking about, doing that, and that's good to have options. But like I said, I'm running with a fierce urgency of now to leave a better world for my boy. And, and I will be the most responsive member.
Okay, great. Thank both of you. We're going to have Naya Hamilton, who's one of our younger members, to ask a question of both of you. Good evening, Naya.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good.
Can you guys hear me well?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. So I know that we're all aware of the cost of education and college debt, especially as it negatively impacts families of color. So I wanted to ask, what is your plan to address these issues, especially in light of the fact that the Build Back Better program has failed to garner the requisite number of votes?
Great question. That's why don't you start with that, Glenn, and then Jazz, then you can answer that.
Okay. I mean, there's multiple answers to that. Obviously, the federal government needs to do more. I know there's been resistance. I can't figure out why, but the Republicans have been fighting, financial aid for people, even if it's need based, so that they can go to college. They've been fighting loan forgiveness for decades now. When I was a kid going to college, they were fighting loan forgiveness and financial aid. In fact, they took away a lot of the Pell Grants, for example, for prison inmates. The Reagan administration took that away, and we still haven't gotten it all the way back yet. So I think one of the things we have to do is push to make that happen. But now look, let's be straight. Let's have some real talk. There's a good chance that, we're not going to control the Congress next year. There's a good chance that the Republicans are going to be able to continue to block those things. So what should we do? Well, one of the things I've been fighting for years, and we've had some success, is to get the colleges to step up and do more. I just one quick example. I went to Princeton undergrad, and I started recruiting students here in Prince George's County to go to Princeton after they were admitted, but many of them couldn't go because they couldn't afford to go. And Princeton would offer these packages where they would give some grant money, but a gigantic loan amount. And the student would look and say, well, I can't carry all of that debt. So many of us, I was one, I'm not going to act like I'm the only guy that did this, but across the country, looked at Princeton and said, you've got this gigantic endowment. Use it to have the kids that can go. And so they actually came around eventually. Harvard led the way, Stanford and others. But many of those colleges that have big endowments, now instead of offering loans, they offer grants across the board. So if you get to go, you don't have to pay anything back when you go. And that's a concept that should work not just at the Ivy League, not just at the rich endowment schools, but at the University of Maryland, Bowie State, HBCUs. All of those schools should be looking at the same kind of approach, and we've got to help them get the funding to do that. We also need to make sure that we try and roll out opportunities in the private sector. So if you get a job, one quick example, when I was state's attorney, one of the things we extended working through the state legislature was loan forgiveness for lawyers who went to law school and had a lot of debt. Well, if you have a public service job, like being a prosecutor or a public defender or something like that, loan forgiveness makes sense, not only because it helps them come and do the public service, but because it benefits the community. They're coming to do work. They could make more work in someplace else. They come and do the work for the community. That makes a difference. And then finally, I think we need to really make efforts to get the private sector to step up in other ways too. We've got huge loan amounts. Well, Mackenzie Scott, for example, the Amazon, one of the Amazon billionaires, decided to start giving money out, and she gave billions of dollars out to HBCUs across the country. My son's at Howard. Howard got $40 million from her. That's the kind of thing that we need to find ways to get other people who have those kinds of dollars to give to those schools. Traditionally, they give them to the schools that got more than they need already. If we could get them to give loans like that to the HBCUs and minority institutions across the country, it would make a difference. And then there's one last thing I'll say. First Generation College Bound is a program here in Prince George's County. Joe Fisher's been doing that for 25 years plus. On his own, he's been helping kids. He's helped hundreds of kids go to school. They're first generation. Many times they don't have the money to do it, but they find a way to help get the money to them so that they can go. We need to support programs like that here in Prince George's County.
Great. Mr. Lewis?
Naya, thank you for your question. That's actually why I'm in politics. What got my start. I was working my way through the University of Maryland College Park, playing guitar at local churches, working at the local hotels as a receptionist. And during the recession, the legislature proposed increasing tuition because of lost revenue from people losing their jobs, which would have priced me out. And me and about 600 of my buddies decided we weren't going to go for that and got organized. And the rest is history, so to say. I'm going to just lay a few facts out first. About a quarter of those who have student debt are non-graduates. So these are folks who are carrying student loan debt who never got a degree, which means they're not going to benefit from increased earning potential to pay it off. I think the president has the power currently to cancel a lot of this debt. And in my website, I've laid out a Black agenda, which is key to this, is that we know for us to be economically mobile for communities of color, we typically have to earn degrees. That degree comes at increased cost for us with less certainty of getting the job and then getting those equal wages for that point later on. And we need to use the full weight of the federal government and our allies, wherever they may be, to make sure that it is equitable for us to be able to move our families up the economic ladder. So I think the president can currently, of course, there was language within Build Back Better, but I believe, as many have stated, he has the power currently to get that done. The other thing is, I just want to state for the record too, within Maryland, we actually expanded free community college for those under, I believe, $150,000 in the state, which is good. But we need to make that, free across the country, which was another promise that was in Build Back Better Act because of the pushback in the Senate. That got taken out. Unfortunately, many folks, heard that this week. I think we need to put that back in and continue to fight for it. There's a very good chance we will be in a minority next Congress. But as I continue to talk to a number of Republican colleagues, at least here, some of these things are common sense, right? And we need to get out of the, MSNBC, CNN circle and start to build with our fellow Americans to make sure we can move forward an agenda for everyone. The last thing I was going to say is, I sit on the Board of Governors, that's the governing body for University of Maryland College Park's Alumni Association. And we're doing the same thing that Glenn was referencing, that I believe that Princeton was doing, right? And I think we do need our alumni and our major, partners within industry to help us in expanding, programs that can help make sure folks can go affordably to school. But ultimately, we shouldn't leave this up to the private sector because we know it won't be implemented equitably. We need the government to equalize access, and that means we need to cancel the student debt.
Thank you very much. Thank both of you. We have a question from Zainab Abbas. The pandemic showed a big disparity in education, especially in math and health. how do the candidates plan to address the disparities moving forward to close the gaps? Mr. Lewis, I'll start with you.
Sure. So a lot of the gaps that was further exposed in learning loss was one of the big areas that, students who would be getting that extra tutoring, extra help, they're not able to get it as easy. One, because not everyone had, adequate broadband access, which is something we need to work on. And we're going to need to be catching up. I think there are a lot of innovative programs that are being deployed, particularly in Prince George's County Public Schools. They're allowing our youth to use software that puts them on a pathway of learning that is appropriate for them, so that they aren't necessarily, if they're a little behind the class, they get that extra support for them. The student next to them won't necessarily know that they're in a different space, but they get a program that's appropriate. I think we need to fund a dynamic education system like we did for Maryland's Blueprint for the Future in the Maryland legislature, where we are pumping so much more, I think to the tune of $5 billion more resources into our public education system. That's going to mean more resources in the classroom for our students, increased teacher pay, more dynamic programming, so that if you don't want to go to college, if a trade is more your route, you are getting exposure to that as well while you are in high school. And I bring that up specifically because when I tour a lot of our trades here in Prince George's County, whether it's the Electrical Workers Union, the Sheet Metal Workers Union, there aren't a lot of Prince Georgians who are going in to be apprentices in these programs. And the reason why is because they are failing the entrance exams for what? Math and science, right? So we need more dynamic programming so that even if you want to go down the trade route as opposed to college, you're getting the resources that you need.
Thank you. Mr. Ivey?
I think the really scary part of what's happening with education due to COVID is at the front end of the education process. And the ones I'm really worried about are the kids who over the last 2 years have been kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and maybe up to third grade. And the reason that worries me the most is because those are the ages where they learn how to read and they start learning basic math and move to multiplication. And what I think is going to happen, I think it's already started, frankly, is a lot of those kids aren't learning to read on time. And we knew we had challenges with that already in many of our schools across the country and in our community. And so I think it's a huge challenge, because if we don't take it on now, studies have shown that a lot of times those kids will never catch up. They'll end up dropping out ninth grade. And that's your school to prison pipeline kind of issue that we desperately need to change and challenge and correct. So I think the immediate short run point that we need to do is, we need smaller class sizes in those grades. And to the extent you can't break it out and, you got classes now with 30 plus kids. What my son David teaches, he's teaching at one of the middle schools here in Prince George's County. He had classes with 44, 45 kids in them. And he's teaching Spanish. So he's supposed to be teaching them individually how to learn how to speak. Well, you can't teach that to 45 kids. It doesn't work. And reading is the same way, especially with kids that didn't come from households that prepared them to learn and be educated in reading. And so I think you need teachers' aides in those classes. A couple of my kids went to a school here, actually, ironically, Judy P. Hoyer Elementary School down the street. And they learned how to read at 4 and 5 years old, not because they were particularly gifted children necessarily, because they came from a special household, because they had older brothers that didn't learn to read that early. It was because they had a program that structured it so the reading aide had 10 kids, the teacher had 10 kids, and they could focus and do intensive study and teaching to help them learn how to read. That program got shut down. I don't know why, but that's one of the things we need to bring back, and we need to get more of that across the county. This is an all hands on deck scenario from an education standpoint. For those kids, this is the moment. It has to happen now, and we have to find ways to make sure it does.
Thank you both, gentlemen, for that response. We have a question from Kaif, Johnson. So if we can bring Kaif up to ask the question.
Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. My question is it's a different question, but for each of you. It'll make sense when I ask it. Mr. Ivy, you're 60 years old. So as a young person, why should I vote for you if, like, you're just, if you're are you bringing anything new to the table that other 60-year-olds are not, that are already in Congress? We have enough of them. And as for Delegate Lewis, you're very young. Some might say that you lack experience in this area. What does your youth allow you to have that the other older members might not, besides like the ability to walk upright?
Great question. Because you asked it of the state's attorney first, I'll let Glenn go first.
Well, I think that my track record, as I mentioned before, really speaks for itself. And, we can talk about some of the things that I've done over the years, but I think it's the best predictor of things that I can do if I get a chance to go to Congress. So the types of things that we need in the community are the types of things that I've not only helped to bring to the community, but helped to build out. I didn't start everything that we worked on. We had some programs that were there before I got there, but we expanded them and made them better. Teen court was one of those. So I think, and no offense, but I'm not, I'm 60, but I'm still pretty spry. Let's say it that way. And I think I certainly have the energy, the strength, the passion, the experience, and the knowledge to do the types of things that we want to get done. And by the way, I mentioned this before, the fight that we're going to be looking at in the House next year, I've done it before. In fact, I did the last big one that we faced down as a Democratic Party, and that was the Clinton administration. So, I don't mind people being young. I wish them the best and urge them to enjoy it. My kids, my grandkids, all the same. But as far as hitting the ground running and getting things done when I get there, I think I've demonstrated for decades now that I can do that.
Thank you both, gentlemen. So we have a question from Layla. And before Layla asks the question, we're going to go after that into our lightning round, which will have series of questions. And both of you have 90 seconds to answer it. And because we have about 7 questions and we want to make sure everybody's question is asked. So after Layla asks her online question and you answer that, then we'll go into the lightning round for the other 7 questions. Layla?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'm a graduating senior this year from Bowie High School. And my question to y'all is, I want to know from each of you your opinion on investing in cryptocurrency. And would you propose legislation making it difficult for me to invest in this?
Thanks, Layla. Glenn, Jazz, you're the youngster. I'll let you.
So if it's okay, I'll try to keep it tight and also respond to the last question from, I believe, Kaif. While I do that, first, no, I would not make it harder for you to invest in cryptocurrency. We are actually having a conversation within the state legislature currently about ways to expand the use of cryptocurrency securely, because we believe it might be a way to affect generational and racial wealth building. That's a big conversation happening within the Treasury right now. I think you're right in the right spot. And congratulations. I hope you graduate and do amazing things. To Kai's answer, I do think my youth is an advantage. I think it brings a different approach. I would be the youngest member of Congress from Maryland. I would be the youngest in our history, particularly for folks of color. I grew up in a generation that was defined by, the Twin Towers, 2 wars, a recession, and this pandemic. So when people talk about the good old days, we never saw them, right? But that is why so many folks from my generation are so energetic to try to make sure that the future is bright. And that's why I'm running, as I stated earlier, for my baby boy, to try to make sure that, the situation in which I was raised in and the way I view things is just a little bit better. I've served in working for Majority Leader Steny Hoyer for the last decade. So I can hit the ground running, because all the nonsense we see going on, I've been there as we've been in that fight day in and day out. The last thing I'll say on this is when January 6th occurred, fortunately, I was home on paternity leave, but for the junior staffers who are working underneath me, I was texting them furiously throughout the day. They hid in an overgrown closet while a lot of the insurrectionists raided the majority leader's office, destroying John Lewis's picture, much like what's behind me right now. And they were terrified that they were going to be killed. I will never forgive those folks. The fight is very real and personal for me, and I'll be ready to hit the ground running.
And Jazz, let me apologize to you because I did not give you a chance to answer that. That's my fault. So this is the lightning round. I'm going to answer the first question. This is from Professor Muhammad Ali. If a quarter of your constituency sign a petition against a certain policy, but a lobbyist pays you $1 million to support the policy, who would you side regardless of what you think is right or wrong? It's a minute and a half. Jazz, I'll give you the first shot at it.
Yeah, I will always go with what I think is right. Period. That's both for my constituents signing a petition or lobbyists approaching me about anything. At the end of the day, we have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror, kiss our families and go to bed and pray to our God and know that we've done what we've been sent here to do. That's my answer to that, Professor Lee.
Right.
Yeah, tough choices have to be made. I had cases where I had to decide, for example, I didn't think we could go forward with prosecuting a murder case or something along those lines. And, I had parents break down crying that we weren't able to go forward. I had people protest in front of the courthouse. But you have to do what you think is right, even when it hurts sometimes and even when it's not easy. So that's, like I said, I've done that for decades now, and I'll continue to do that.
So would you take the $1 million? You won't take the $1 million.
Well, fortunately, you can't get $1 million, the way the rules work. So,
right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear the answer to that. This one is from Andasia Rahim. Substantial affordable housing is an ongoing problem in Prince George's County. What is your plan to address this issue? Jazz, I'll also let you go first again.
Sure thing. And first, I'll say, just in case I don't cover everything, I rolled out a Black agenda focused on housing justice. Please check out my website where it's all laid out. But affordable housing is a big issue. For one, I think we need to make sure that housing vouchers aren't limited to low-income communities. You should be able to, one, access a voucher and move to areas of opportunity. It's proven that the rising tide lifts all boats. So if you move into a community with a quality school, your child is going to perform better because they're going to deviate to the mean. That's the first part. The second thing is that we need to invest federally in housing trusts to make sure that as developers and others who want to develop, they can affordably do so. Developers honestly bear a ton of risk on the front end when they're building something. And if we are serious about making sure that housing is affordable and aren't pricing people out and forcing communities out of their homes, they're going to put some skin in the game on the front end. And that means putting together housing trusts. We've done that within the state, but federally, we need to do a lot more in that. That also means inclusionary zoning so that, there are different type of housing structures in the neighborhood. Many folks here in Prince George's County loves our single family, gated 2-picket fence type of deal. But it becomes very, cost prohibitive, right? And the big problem we have right now is that so many younger folks can't afford to live in a home that they grew up in, right? Whether that's, in Bowie or Upper Marlboro or you name it, and they're going to other places, and we need them to spend their money here, right? So the government needs to put some skin in the game. We have some plans around that. This is one of the issues I worked for Majority Leader Hoyer while I was on his staff. And thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer. Glenn?
Well, I think affordable housing is a big challenge in the Washington, D.C. area. And low-income housing doesn't even get discussed most of the time. Affordable housing, I think for a family of 4 in Washington, D.C. is around $80,000 for the family. And so there's a lot of people I know in Prince George's County and around who aren't making $80,000. So, rolling out programs to address that issue doesn't always help them out. A second piece too, though, that I want to, and this is controversial, frankly, but, there's a lot of low income housing in Prince George's County. A lot of the redevelopment that happened in Washington, D.C. tore down low income and affordable housing and forced people to leave Washington, D.C. Some came here, some went other places. But I think if we're going to be serious about affordable housing and low income housing too, as a region, other jurisdictions need to step up. That includes Montgomery County, Washington, D.C., and Fairfax. They've got to make sure that they're doing their fair share of taking these low-income folks in, because it creates a new level of strain on education in the schools, sometimes on police and other public services that have to be paid out. Remember a minute ago when I was talking about teaching kids how to read in kindergarten and first grade? Part of that is challenging because we have to spend so much money on helping kids catch up instead of helping them get off to the fast start. And so we get less money from taxes here in Prince George's County than some of our neighboring jurisdictions like Montgomery and DC. But we have more people here that have need. We need to even that out and share that so that everybody can
90 seconds is up.
Better. Sorry.
That's all right.
All right.
This question is from Billy Balogan. What can you do to remove the laws that inhibit our educators but encourages some of our students to be mindless of consequences for their actions or inactions, thereby leading them to lawlessness? And I guess if I had to summarize it, what can we do as elected officials to put in laws that would not stop educators from really taking action to not only protect themselves, but also to protect the rest of the students in their classroom? That's how I read it.
I don't mind responding. Sure. So the first thing I would say, in the state legislature, while I've been chair of the Democratic caucus, we passed legislation to limit the forced teaching to the test to 2% of instructional time. We are still working on operationalizing that to make sure that's what's actually happening in the classroom. But, if we need to trust our educators to do their jobs, which is to educate our youth and prepare them to be the workforce of tomorrow. That's their job, not to just focus on endless tests that may not be benefiting our students. That's the first part. The other part is, I think we have a lot of trauma happening in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and I think one of the things that we passed in the blueprint, which we need to do federally, particularly with the community schools model, is increasing the amount of mental health resources in our schools. A lot of these students are bringing, trauma and stress, and that pours itself out in them acting up in the classroom, or them even being violent to someone else. They need to get that help. I am a person who believes that if you do a violent act against someone, there are consequences for that, 100%. I've been a victim of violent crime myself. But I also believe that too often we wait until that act before we give them the services that they need. And, our students, our communities are suffering. And mental health is something we need to talk about a lot more and put those resources in the school and make it available to our youth. And I believe that will help with what we're seeing.
Glenn?
Well, it's a great question. And it's a real challenge for teachers. I mean, I mentioned my son David's a school teacher now, and we were talking about this because when I was state's attorney, this would pop up. Fight breaks out in a school. A lot of times the students aren't going to break it up. In fact, now we got students breaking out their phones so they can videotape it and post it on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And guess what? The teachers who get there, well, they're not supposed to intervene. In fact, they can get in trouble for intervening. In fact, other students can get in trouble for intervening and breaking up the fight. So, I'm one of the people who thinks that pendulum swung too far when I was a kid in high school, and it's a long time ago, but we had fights then too. And time can be of the essence there. I think it was in Charles County just last week. A girl got beaten so badly in school by another girl. She was kicked in the head while she was down on the ground. She was hospitalized. That's one of those scenarios where you don't want people standing around waiting because they're afraid to intervene and pull the other girl off. We should find ways to allow some sort of intervention to happen in that kind of a crisis situation. And then, before the crisis, I think you have to identify people, students in particular, because usually kids don't just show up one day and all of a sudden they're, violent outbreaks, they're attacking people. For a lot of these kids, it builds up over years. It can start in K and 1 or 2. And if you don't cut it off in high school, a lot of those kids are the ones that end up shooting people out on the street. One of the things I found.
Glenn, you got 90 seconds.
All right.
This is from Jamil White.
Okay.
For each candidate, what are your 3 primary legislative priorities? What would a successful term look like to each of you? Jazz, why don't you take that?
Sure. So I think one of the priorities, I passed a bill called the Health Equity Resource Community Initiatives here in the state of Maryland, which is going to subsidize healthcare practitioners, both physical and mental, locating in our high needs communities in the urban, suburban, and rural sector of the state. After we passed it, as I said earlier, Congressman Brown introduced my bill on Capitol Hill. I plan to bring that bill back to make it law of the land and bring more resources to our community. I still think we need to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I think the job is not done. Like I said, I'm running as a effective progressive, and I think, look, if we need to piece it apart because of the pushback we're getting from the Senate, we need to do that. I come from a family who was in law enforcement. My mother was a DEA agent. I respect law enforcement. I think accountability helps them when I talk to officers of color. That's another thing I think that is critically important. And as well as healthy food. Like I mentioned earlier, I helped open up a nonprofit grocery store. So much of our health is tied to what we eat and how we eat. And we have a lot of food deserts in Prince George's County. I've been working on this my entire time as a legislator. This is important. And lastly, ultimately, the economy. There's so many things we need to do to get Americans back working again through that Making an America plan, bringing a lot of our manufacturing back. It'll be jobs for folks in our community.
Ivey?
Yeah, I mean, as I started out saying, I think, gas is too high, groceries are too high, there's too much crime. I mean, there's just those types of things I think are immediate needs that we need to address. The gas too high, groceries too high, inflation's taken off. I don't know that it's a long-term problem, but we need to make sure we provide short-term assistance for people who are really struggling with that. Employment's a key piece of that. I still think $15 an hour is something we need to make happen across the board. I know wages are finally going up after a couple of decades, but we need to make sure it stays up and doesn't dip down just after we get through this crisis. I think healthcare expansion, Medicare for all, I think all of us support that, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen as the whole package. I think we have to do pieces of it that we can get done now, like prescription drug care, for example, and get it done immediately, because we want the whole slice, but we can help millions of people right now if we take a compromise and work something out. And then with respect to the economic development of the region, I think getting more development here, more businesses. A lot of them took major hits during the COVID crisis, and that's going to continue. But we can help them rebuild. I think the PPP loans were a big step in the right direction for many of them. We have to make sure we bring in new businesses, help them expand and help them grow, because those are the engines that provide the jobs in our community and actually help to train our kids to become entrepreneurs themselves one day. So that's where I would focus on.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. As we're nearing the end of this discussion, there's a question that's near and dear to all of our members of Prince George's County Muslim Council. As you know, you're going to be accepting, one of you, the mantle of the Maryland Fourth, which covers well over 8 masjids, or we call them masajid for short, which goes from Anne Arundel County all the way to Laurel, and then here to Bowie, and then out to past Glenarden. And so, and down up to Charles County, right before Charles County. So you have a plethora of mosques, masjids, and you have well over 15,000 members that worship every Friday and are actually voters. And one of the things that we hear all the time, and as Muslims, as you know, we've talked to each of you individually about it, we are very concerned over what happens to our brothers and sisters over abroad. Even the J Street Group, which is a Jewish organization here in America, has called the situation that happens as we are speaking. It's daylight in Israel as it is now, and we have our brothers and sisters that can't eat their own food, can't raise their own food, obtain their own water. And we all talk about Hamas and what Hamas does and doesn't do, but I'm talking about the general population that live in Palestine that can't even get out of their own confines, that's their home, not to mention the eradication of their homeland and their houses for new settlements in the West that the international community has called untenable. And so we know that Congress is pro-Israel. And we know that even groups like I said again, J Street, which is a major Jewish lobby, has spoke out against this. What will happen when there is a article that comes to the floor about the, censoring Israel or removing or withholding their money to get them to do what is correct for humanity, irrespective of their faith, but for the humanity for those Palestinians that can't even worship in their own land, can't even grow their own food, and can't even be human beings. And even though people call it akin to apartheid, I think it's even worse because they can't even determine where they need to be on their own terms. So I'll start with you, Glenn, and then also with you, Jazz.
Well, I think under the Netanyahu years, there were some real setbacks from where things should have been going and had been going in some of the previous years. I think the new administration with Naftali and the coalition government is not going at light speed, but starting to move in the right direction in some ways. One example is, I believe that there's an Arab party that's part of this governing coalition for the first time in Israeli history. And I think the Abraham Accords and some of the other aspects of what Israel's doing with neighboring countries is a big step in the right direction. I saw just the other day a woman named Susie Gelman who put on a panel about the settlements issue, and it looked like she focused on violence that Israeli settlers were committing against Palestinians and other Arabs. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to be open to looking at. But I think it's critical for two things. One is to make sure that there are negotiations that go forward between the two parties. I think we need to push the parties together and make sure that they work to hammer out a solution among themselves, because I think that's the only way you're going to ultimately have a lasting solution there. And then secondly, I think it's critical to make sure that we can sustain the democracy in Israel. It's the only democracy in that region. And I think we need to make sure it's preserved for a variety of reasons, but because democracy is better than autocracy. So, a lot of challenges, no question. We've been dealing with these. I've been watching them for 50 plus years now, but I think there's a chance to move in the right direction that's opening up now, and we need to help push both of the parties in that direction.
Okay. Jazz?
Yeah. So I think that, first I want to say, because I think there's a statement regarding Hamas that says beside Hamas. I don't know that you can just say beside Hamas. What I pledge to be is an independent operator on behalf of the people of the district that I'm representing, and making sure that we are supporting the people of the region, including the Palestinian people who yearn for their own democracy in a sovereign state of their own, duly elected with the full powers that they are entitled. That is what I want. That is what I pledge. That's what I believe is best for the region, for the American people, as much as for them there. I do believe that having democratic partners who have fully functioning and regularly, occurring elections is what we as Americans is our best interest. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority haven't had elections in over 20 years. And when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip back in 2007, Hamas took over. I agree with what Glenn said that, Netanyahu made the situation much worse over his years. And with the coalition government now, there is the potential for us to be on a better path. I think that the settlements is something that's going to absolutely have to be addressed. There's no way we can have a two-state solution if a number of Israeli citizens continue to settle on lands in the West Bank. I've been very clear about that. That's where I stand, and I will call it out like I have before. But we do also need to put a lot of pressure on, the Palestinian Authority and others to make sure that they are a democracy that is not supporting other folks who would threaten the security of Israel either, because there's no way we can keep them at the table negotiating if one's in threat of their security.
So what I'll do, I know we're at the hour. This discussion can't be wrapped up in 2 minutes, but I think we would definitely like to invite both of you back before the election to speak specifically on that, because I think part of your the benefit of having us to talk through it is you'll hear a different side, and we concur with most of the points you made, but I think when you look at it from a historical perspective with a local and current understanding, I think we can come to some resolution, and we would hope that you can listen and then learn, and at the same time walk away with a better understanding of that region and that situation. And so with that, I would like to bring the president, Jamil Johnson, because I know he had some closing remarks that he wanted to make. So Jamil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kareem. And thank you for doing such a great job of moderating this. But let me begin by thanking both our guest, former State's Attorney Glenn Ivey, and Delegate Jazz Lewis, both individuals who have done, sincere work for this county, even long before I got here, and continue to do so now. I think we'll have a good representative, regardless who ultimately is the winner is. I want to say to the people who have attended, we appreciate you being on the Facebook, on the YouTube, participating, asking questions. And as a matter of fact, we're going to reach out to you to get your point of view on the candidates as part of Prince George's County Muslim Council making a decision of who to endorse. So the involvement of the community is critical, and the support of institutions that work for the community is critical. So we hope that you'll support PGCMC and stay involved in what's happening in the county, which is our responsibility as Muslims, is our responsibility to support not only our needs, but to support the needs of our neighbors. And B, we don't have to be elected officials, but we have to have the same type of community concern that makes our neighborhoods and our community and our county better, because we all live here. And as Muslims, we all know the statements of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the rights of our neighbors over us. So all of us are neighbors. I also want to mention very quickly, we have the 2022 Maryland Muslim Lobby Day, which will also be online. We love it better when it's in person. We get to go visit members in their offices. But this one will be virtual on Tuesday evening at 6:30. That's February 15th. And we'll be supporting a couple of pieces of legislation, including one about diverse asset managers that we're working on. Secondly, we have, some of you may have seen go out, that we are applications are open for our Emerging County Leaders Internship Program, which is for college students between the age of 18 and 25. There will be a paid stipend, and those students will be placed with public policy positions, such as our two Congress members' offices, one of our state senators, with an organization called Campus Vote that teaches young people how to advocate, with law firms and others. So please send your college students to take a look at it and apply for it. It's a great opportunity for those who are interested in public policy and advocacy. So again, thank everybody very much. I thought it was a great evening. We'll continue to share this so people can watch it. And gentlemen, good luck to both of you in this race.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good day.
Same to you.